I want to tell you about a sound. It's the sound a phone makes when you answer it, and the voice on the other end belongs to a doctor, and before the doctor says anything else, you already know from the way he said your name. It's a specific sound, the silence between your name and the next word. I heard that sound on a Thursday afternoon in October, sitting in the parking lot of a Kroger in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with 2 bags of groceries on the passenger seat. My wife Patricia had been in for tests 3 days before. I knew before he finished the sentence. I knew before he got to the word. And I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes with the groceries and the phone on my lap, and the afternoon sun coming through the windshield, and everything in the world looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes ago, and none of it was the same. Patricia died 16 months later, ovarian cancer. She was 61. We'd been married for 31 years and had planned to retire together and had talked about Portugal specifically since a trip we'd taken there for our 25th anniversary, when we spent 2 weeks in a small coastal town and ate sardines every day and walked on cobblestones and bought a bottle of wine for $3 and drank it on a terrace and agreed, both of us, without making it formal, that something about this place felt like where we were supposed to end up. My name is Gerald Webb. I'm 65 now, and I'm telling you this from that same country, from a village in the Alentejo region of Portugal, in a stone house that costs me 480 euros a month. And I live here on $1,500, and I want to tell you how I got here and why it matters and what it cost me to actually go, because the cost wasn't money. Let me tell you the before, because to understand what this is, you need to understand what that was. I spent 31 years working for the city of Albuquerque in the Public Works Department, water infrastructure. I was not glamorous. I was the guy who knew where all the pipes were, which turns out to be important because nobody thinks about where the pipes are until the water stops working, at which point everyone thinks about where the pipes are very urgently. I retired at 63 with a municipal pension of $1,150 a month and Social Security of $620. Total income $1,770 a month. After Patricia died, I sold the house we'd owned for 19 years, paid off some debts, and ended up with about $60,000 in savings. Not much for a lifetime of 2 people working. But I want to be accurate. After the medical bills, after the hospice care, after the funeral, $60,000 was what was left. My apartment in Albuquerque, after I sold the house, was $1,100 a month. The math was the same as it always is for people in my situation, which is to say it almost worked. Almost. $1,100 rent, plus utilities, plus a health insurance premium that ate $400 a month, plus food, plus gas, plus the car, plus the medication. Patricia's illness had put me on for blood pressure, and I was running a deficit every month of somewhere between $200 and $300, which I covered by drawing from the $60,000, which meant that I was on a timeline, a quiet countdown, and the end of the countdown was not pleasant to think about. The grief was the harder thing. I'm going to tell you about the grief, because I think if I don't, this story doesn't make sense. After Patricia, there was a period, about 8 months, that I've never been able to describe exactly, except to say that I was moving through everything at the wrong speed. The world was happening at one pace, and I was happening at another, and they didn't align. I went to the grocery store and couldn't remember why I'd come. I made dinner for 2 out of habit, and then sat down at a table set for 2 and ate half of what I'd made and put the other half away in a container and stood in the kitchen for a long time not knowing what to do next. I had been part of a pair for 31 years, and being a single unit again felt like trying to walk after you've been carrying something heavy for so long that your posture has changed around it. The grief was physical. It had weight and texture, and it lived in my chest. And some mornings, it was the first thing I was aware of before I even fully woke up. I started watching travel videos, not looking for anything, just watching them the way you watch things when you can't read and can't sleep and the television is too loud and your phone is the only quiet company available. And one night I was watching videos about Portugal. I don't remember why I searched for it, probably because some part of my brain still filed it under Patricia, and that was where I went when I wanted to be somewhere near her. And I found a video of a retired American couple living in a village in the Alentejo. And then the man, the husband, had died, and the wife had stayed. She was talking about staying alone in Portugal on her husband's Social Security survivor benefit and a small pension. And she said something that stopped me cold. She said, I stay because this is where we were happiest, and I need to be in a place where I can still feel that. I watched that video twice, and then I lay in the dark with the phone face down on my chest, and I thought about Patricia and the sardines and the $3 wine and the cobblestones and the way she had looked at me on that terrace on our 25th anniversary with the sun going down behind her and said, "This one, Gerald. If we get to pick, this is the one. We'd been planning to pick it. We just ran out of time to get there together." And I lay there and I thought, she didn't say we had to go together. She said, "This is the one." And something shifted, not fixed, shifted. Let me talk about the fear before I talk about the going, because the fear is the part that nobody names, and I think naming it matters. I was 64 years old and my wife was gone, and I had $60,000 I was spending down and a health insurance situation that was a monthly emergency. And I was looking at videos of Portugal at 2 a.m, thinking about moving to a country where I didn't speak the language and didn't know a soul, and where the bureaucracy, I'd been warned, was genuinely Byzantine, and where if something went wrong, I would be alone in a country that was not mine. The fear voice was very good at its job. It said, "You are old enough that this should be about security, not adventure," it said. "Patricia would not have wanted you to be irresponsible." It said, "What kind of man spends down $60,000 moving to a foreign country because of a feeling on a terrace 25 years ago?" The fear voice had a way of making everything I was considering sound like a midlife crisis that was 10 years too late and 10 years too stupid. And somewhere in those weeks, I found a book called "You Were Never Meant to Stay." I don't read much anymore, which is a thing I would have been embarrassed to admit when I was young and read constantly. But I read this one, cover to cover in 4 sittings, because the book understands the fear voice. It doesn't dismiss it, which would be useless. It sits with it, and it asks what the voice is actually protecting, and whether that thing needs protecting or whether it's just inertia dressed up as wisdom. And reading it in that apartment in Albuquerque with the containers of habit dinners in the refrigerator, I started to separate the reasonable fears from the ones that were just old habits of caution that had outlived their usefulness. The link is in the description. Read it if any of this is speaking to something in your chest. My son David made it possible to actually go. He's 38, lives in Denver, works in software, has 2 kids of his own. I drove up to Denver in April to tell him in person because I am from a generation that believes news should be delivered face to face. I told him I was thinking about Portugal, about the village, about the math. He looked at me for a long time and then he said, "Dad, when's the last time you looked forward to anything?" And I had to think, which told me everything I needed to know. He helped me with the visa paperwork. Portugal has a passive income visa for retirees, and with my combined pension and Social Security, I met the income requirement. David drove me to the consulate. He carried my bag at the airport. He told me at security before I went through, "Mom would have gone, Dad. You know that." And that was it. That was the thing. I knew that. I had known that. I had just needed someone else to say it. I landed in Lisbon in June. June in Lisbon is like walking into a painting that someone left in the sun too long. The light is different there. It has an angle and a warmth that I have never seen anywhere in 31 years of living in New Mexico, which has its own extraordinary light. I took a bus to the Alentejo. The landscape is rolling hills and cork trees and this enormous sky that goes on longer than you expect, and the white villages on the hilltops look exactly like the postcards, which I'd always assumed was a lie that postcards tell. It's not a lie. They look like that in person. I found the village through an expat forum and a real estate agent in the nearby town who spoke enough English and had enough patience to help me understand what I was looking at. The house is stone, 2 stories. The walls are thick enough that the interior stays cool through the summer without air conditioning, which sounds impossible, but is just physics. I have a fireplace in the main room, a kitchen that opens to a small courtyard with a lemon tree, 2 bedrooms, and a terrace on the 2nd floor from which I can see the hills going away in every direction until they meet the sky. My rent is 480 euros. At the current exchange rate, approximately $520 for the stone house with the lemon tree and the view. My apartment in Albuquerque was $1,100. I have told this number to every American I've met here and watched their face do the same thing every time. The number's complete. I know you need them, and I have them exact because I keep a spending notebook the same way I kept infrastructure logs for 31 years. Rent, $520. Utilities, electricity and water, and the gas for the kitchen, $90. Internet, $40. Phone, $20. Health. I enrolled in Portugal's public health system, which took paperwork and about 3 months of persistence, but which now means that my monthly health cost is a nominal enrollment fee of about 30 euros, $40, for access to a system that has given me better care than I received in Albuquerque on a $400 premium. Food. I shop at the local market and the weekly farmers market in the village square. Fresh vegetables, local olive oil, bread baked that morning, sardines direct from the coast, wine, cheese. My monthly food budget is about $260, and I eat like I never ate in New Mexico. My total monthly spending is about $970. My income is $1,770. I save approximately $800 every month. The $60,000 I'd been drawing down is now growing. I have never, at any point in my adult life, described my savings as growing. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I am still sitting with it. I want to tell you about the village because the village is not background. The The village is the point. There are maybe 500 people here. The cobblestone main street ends at a square with a fountain, and every evening, starting around 6, the square fills up with people in the way that squares in small Portuguese towns fill up, not because anything is happening, because nothing is happening, but because this is what people do here when the day's work is done. They come out, they sit, they talk to the person next to them. The cafe on the corner opens its doors, and the chairs come out onto the sidewalk, and the old men argue about football, and the younger couples bring their children, and someone's grandmother is always there at the same table with a coffee and a clear view of everything worth watching. I sat in that square for the first week without understanding a word of what anyone was saying, and it didn't matter. It felt like something I'd been missing for a long time without having a word for it. Community is too big a word and sounds like a therapy brochure. It's smaller than that. It's just people being in the same place together, because being in the same place together is enough. I'm learning Portuguese. Slowly. I have an app and a tutor who comes to the house twice a week. A university student from the nearby town named Miguel, who charges me 20 euros a lesson and who has the patience of someone who understands that 64-year-old brains work differently than 22-year-old brains, and who corrects my pronunciation with the gentleness of someone who knows I'm trying. I can order coffee, ask directions, buy what I need at the market, and have a simple conversation about the weather, which in a village is not a meaningless topic because the weather determines everything about everyone's day. The mistakes have been spectacular. The word for embarrassed in Portuguese is envergonhado, and I learned it by being envergonhado at least twice a week in public for the first 4 months. But the people here, and I want to be clear about this, the people here treat mistakes with kindness, not the performance of kindness, actual kindness. The woman at the bread shop, Dona Conceição, corrects my Portuguese the same way she'd correct her own grandchild, which is to say without making me feel small about it. I've been here 14 months, and I know the names of most of the people on my street, and some of their histories. And I have been to 2 weddings and 1 funeral, and the funeral was for the oldest man in the village, who was 91, and there was a procession through the cobblestones, and the whole village came, and I walked with them, and I didn't understand the prayers, but I understood the gathering. And I understood that this is how a community holds its dead. And I cried in a way I hadn't since Patricia, and I'm glad I did. I want to tell you about something I didn't expect to happen. There is a woman in the village, Anna, who is 62 and who retired from teaching and who walks every morning past my house on the way to the market. She started saying good morning about 6 months in, which I could say back. And then she started stopping for a moment, and the moments got longer, and she speaks some English, and I speak some Portuguese, and between the two, we manage something that feels like real conversation. She lost her husband 3 years ago. We've never talked about that specifically. We don't need to. There are things people understand about each other that don't require language, and one of them is the particular kind of aloneness that comes from having been part of something and then not. We walk to the market together sometimes on Saturday mornings. That's all it is. 2 people walking to the market. But I want to tell you because I promised the honest version, and the honest version is that I came here for math and an old promise to a woman on a terrace. And somewhere in the middle of a Portuguese village, I found out that there was still more life to be lived than I'd given the situation credit for. I called David every Sunday. I video call because the grandkids, who are 6 and 9, like to look at the house and the lemon tree and have developed the theory that I live in a castle, which is not entirely inaccurate given the stone walls and the age of the building. My granddaughter asked me once if there was a moat, and I told her there wasn't, but that there were excellent sardines. And she said that wasn't the same thing, and I told her she was right. I go back once a year. I spend 3 weeks in Denver, and I am genuinely fully present for those 3 weeks in a way I could not have been in Albuquerque, because I am no longer a man running a deficit and counting months. I bring things back from Portugal: olive oil, wine, the small handmade ceramic tiles that are everywhere here. Last trip I brought David a bottle of port that cost €4 and that he said was the best thing he'd ever tasted. And €4 is $4.60, and it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. I go to the square sometimes in the evening, and I sit with the old men who argue about football, and I understand about 30% of what they're saying, and I nod. And occasionally I say something that makes them laugh, usually by accident. One of them, a man named Joaquim, who is 78 and has been in this village his whole life and has the calm of a man who has never wondered if he was in the right place, patted my arm one evening and said something to me that Miguel later translated as, "You came a long way to sit here." And Joaquim said it the way you say something that is both an observation and a welcome. "You came a long way." Yes, I did. From the Kroger parking lot in Albuquerque to a square in Portugal with cobblestones and a fountain and an old man telling me I came a long way. I did, and I'd do it again, and I'd leave earlier. If you're watching this and you're where I was, if the math doesn't work, and the silence in the apartment is too loud and you're drawing down savings you can't afford to draw down, and you had a person and now you don't, and you're trying to figure out what the rest looks like, I want to tell you something that I needed someone to tell me. You did not run out of time. You still have time. Not infinite time. I'm not going to lie to you about that. But enough for this. Enough for a lemon tree and a market on Saturday, and a walk with someone who understands the particular aloneness, and a square with old men and terrible wine that is actually excellent wine that costs $4, and that book, You Were Never Meant to Stay. If anything I've said today is sitting in your chest right now, if you recognize something in this, read it. The link is below. It understood me before I understood myself. And sometimes that's the thing that gets you out the door. Come find the square, bring comfortable shoes. The cobblestones are uneven and worth every step.